Welcome to Digital Learning, an initiative of Directorate of Collegiate Education, Government of Karnataka. The Liar short story written by Mulk Anand is prescribed for 3rd semester General English BCom affiliated to Bengaluru North University. I am Nandana NJ, Assistant Professor of English, Government First Grade College, Bagipalli. In the previous sessions pertaining to the lesson The Liar by Mulk Anand, we have dealt with the introduction to the author, introduction to the lesson, and we have tried to understand the story in the context of the time frame, and the contextual interpretation of the lesson also has been dealt with. In the previous session, the plot, the elements of the plot, exposition, rising action, climax, resolution, etc. were dealt in detail. Now, let us continue with this session wherein we will focus on the characterization. The Liar by Mulk Anand. Recapitulation of previous knowledge. The contents of this session are recapitulation of previous knowledge, learning objectives, session outcomes, the lesson The Liar, Unit 3 is going to be continued here, and then finally we will have a recapitulation of the entire session followed by multiple choice questions. Recap of the previous knowledge. In the previous session, we saw how the narrator Anand had argued with Labu about false stories. You have to remember here in the story The Liar by Labu, in the course of the story, Labu narrates two prominent false stories. The first story being the story about the devil ram, after the narration of which the young boy Anand refuses to interact with him anymore, saying that it is a false story. And there is a gap between the two characters there. And then the second story occurs when the young boy Anand goes and speaks to Labu, who has returned after a gap of more than 6 months. So both the stories are false stories, and both the times the young boy Anand is taken in by the false story. Now, after the narration of the first story, Labu had frowned and he had denied to tell more stories after the boy Anand had told that Labu is only telling lies. And after they both stopped talking, he had gone to Nepal with Kuldeep Singh for shikar. As a result, the young boy and Labu had not spoken for more than 6 months. In his absence, in the absence of Labu, the same people, the same village people who used to admire Labu for his capacity as a shikari, etc., used to talk about his incapacity, or in fact they used to say that he was a boaster, a liar, he only talked, he could not do much, etc. All this negative criticism about Labu in his absence more or less hurt the young boy Anand. In fact, the young boy Anand was hurt when his own father commented that Labu is of no use. But the young boy wanted to confront Labu when he came back, and he wanted to ask him, why is it that the entire village does not trust you? But then when Labu came back, there seems to be a change in his character, and he looked very ill and he walked with a limp. The narrator forgot about his quarrel with Labu. He thought, the curiosity gets better of him. He approached him at his old hut, and Labu also should be appreciated because when the young boy approached him, he did not hold any grudges against the boy, and then he spoke to him as if everything was all right with the usual affection that he had with the boy, but then he was ready to create a new story, forgetting about their past quarrels. The learning objectives of this session. Objectives of the session are to motivate students in creative short story writing. It will help the student to develop interest for storytelling. It will help the student to develop imaginative power of the students, develop interest for language learning, and it will also help the students to familiarize themselves with the art of storytelling. Session outcomes. At the end of the session, the student will be able to read, understand and appreciate the content of the text, recognize the elements of the story, develop the art of storytelling. It will also help the student to write creative short stories and also expose themselves to folklore, which will in turn help them to write much better stories. As I have explained before, in the entire lesson, Labu narrates two prominent stories. The first story is about the devil ram, which I read out in the previous session. After the narration of the first story, when the young boy Anand refuses to listen to him, Labu stops talking to him, and even the young boy is fuming with anger as he returns home, making up his mind never to talk to him again. There is a long gap there. Both the prominent characters, Labu and the young boy, do not talk to each other for a long time. In the meanwhile, Labu went on a trip to Nepal and the Himalayas along with Kuldeep Singh and his friends. It was a long time before he returned. And then, speaking about his expedition, after Labu came back, when the young boy approached him, out of his previous affection, he starts talking about the expedition. He says, let me just read from the text. You know, son, Labu began at first pale and hesitant, then smiling and lifting his eyebrows in the familiar manner of the old days. This sentence itself gives clue to the reader that Labu is about to start lying. I went away on a hunting tour in the pay of Subedar's eldest son Kuldeep Singh and some of his friends. Well, we went to Nepal through the Kulu Valley. They had no experience of hunting in this or in any other part of the world, and I led them across such trails as I know and such as the local shikaris told me about. Here again, he is boasting about how much of knowledge he had, which nobody is about to contradict. That boy Kuldeep, referring to the Kuldeep Singh, he says, that boy Kuldeep, I don't know what he does in the army, but he can't shoot at any range, and the sahibs with him were clumsy, purblind white men. I would point to a beast with my stick, and then though they could see the hide before their eyes, they bungled with their guns, or they were too noisy on their feet, and away crashed the bull which we had been tracking. Here he is trying to depict how, though he was very, as a shikari, he would point out animals, yet Kuldeep Singh and all his white British friends were not capable of hunting even a single animal that Labu showed. I would grunt, to continue, he says, I would grunt, shrug my shoulders, and I did not mind because they were like children. The way he is explaining, it's as if he is an indulgent parent who is accepting the flaws of his children. They had finished hundreds of cartridges and had not shot anything, and daily begged me to help them to secure some game. Here again he is boasting about how all of them were dependent on him. At first I told them that the game doesn't taste sweet unless it is shot by oneself, but at length I took pity on them and I thought that I would secure them a good mixed bag. I shot, he says, I shot 12 tigers with my gun, 15 panthers in the course of 7 days and many stacks. This itself is a huge clue to the fact that he is lying. He says single-handedly he hunted 12 tigers, 15 panthers and many stacks, and all in the course of 7 days. And now next he creates a new story which happened during his trip to the Himalayas. On the 8th day, according to Labu's story, on the 8th day in the Himalayas, they met a devil. Now let me just read the description of the monster that Labu narrates. On the 8th day, we saw a monster which had the body of a wild bear, the head of a reindeer, the feet of a goat, the tail of a wild bull, and glistening fibrous tissue all round it, like the white silken veil which the Rani of Bundi wore when she came to visit Subedar Deep Singh's wife. Kuldeep Singh and the Sahibs were very frightened of this apparition and said it was the devil itself who had the shape of an earthly being and who would soon breathe a breath which would mix with the still air of the night and poison life. And then let me continue. They were all going for killing it outright, while I was sure that it was the princess of the royal house of Nepal who had been transformed by some magician into this fantastic shape and size, and I wanted to catch it alive and bring it back to be my bride. This, I guess, is the high point of his story, where he says he was the only one who recognized the apparition as the princess of Nepal, a Rajkumari who has been cursed, and it was transformed because of some magician. So, according to his own false story, he says, Labu went on to relate how beautiful she was and how we resolved to restore her to her normal self by reading magical incantations. Incantations means verses or shlokas or mantras. I told her I loved her, he continued, and she smiled shyly. But some fool, I think it was Subeda's son, fired a volley of shots which frightened her, so she ran, became one with the air, and began to descend the snowy peaks of Kailash Parbat. So, according to this story, he was the one who recognized the beautiful princess. And then, after reading magical incantations, according to Labu's story, he read out some magical incantations, and the monster turned or transformed into a beautiful princess. Labu proposed his love towards her and she too smiled. So, according to Labu's story, after he proposed to her, she too smiled, which is seen as a token of acceptance. But at the same point, at the same precise moment, Kuldeep Singh and his white friends, they started firing, and as a result, the transformed princess became scared. She again ran and disappeared into the mountains, and Labu was not the one to give up. He chased her, fighting with her magician guard. So, to quote from the text, he says, I was bent on rescuing my beloved, and I leaped from one mountain to another, calling after her to stop. But that idiot Kuldeep and the Sahibs kept on shooting and roused the magician who kept guard over her. And this evil sage threw a huge mountain of snow at me to kill me. According to his story, this princess was captured by a magician who had kept her under his spell, and now he appeared on the scene, and he had kept her hidden in the cave. So he now appeared there without making it sure that the princess was to be rescued by Labu. But then Labu was not so easily to give up, and he says that he went in search of her. At one point, the evil sage threw a huge mountain of snow at Labu to kill him. But then Labu says, I just blew a breath of hot air, and the mountain of snow cracked into a million pieces and hung about the sky like glittering stars. And then the magician struck the earth with his feet and opened up a grave to bury me alive. I leapt right across the fissure and found myself on a peak in the land who never dies. By now, of course, the magician had hidden the beast away in some cave, so I gave up on the chase, and there was the doom of death about this beauty anyhow. And within one leap across the Himalayas for home. So, according to Labu's story, though he went in pursuit of the monster or the magical beast who was a captured Nepali princess, because the magician came there and he tried to kill Labu, Labu realized that it is not fruitful going in search of the princess again. So he leapt back, and observe the sentence, within one leap from Himalayas, he reached home. At this precise point, the innocent boy who was listening to the story asked him, so as you landed on this side of the mountain, you sprained your foot, is it? So the young boy, innocently listening to the story, was so taken in by the story that he again believed him. Once again he fell prey to his false story, and according to the boy, this was the reason for Labu's sprained leg, and it surprised him. But then, looking at boy's reaction, Labu was surprised. And why? Because he thought he had already narrated the story before. Let us try to recapitulate what is it that we have learnt in this session. In this session, Labu explained the reason for his leg sprain, or why is it that he was limping. According to this story, in the past 6 months, why was he not seen in the village? According to his story, he had accompanied Kuldeep Singh on a shikari expedition. He went on a trip to Nepal and Himalayas along with Kuldeep Singh and his friends. And then he describes how Kuldeep Singh and his white friends were not up to the mark, and though he pointed to innumerable animals, yet Kuldeep Singh and his white friends were unable to kill even one animal for that matter. And just to pacify them, placate them, Labu says he hunted 12 tigers, 15 panthers and many stags within a span of 1 week. This again is a clear indication that he is a boaster and he is also a liar. And in continuation of the story, he says on the 8th day in the Himalayas, they met a devil or an apparition which looked like a devil. In fact, it had coming to the description of the devil or the apparition which appeared, Labu says it had the body of a wild bear and the head of a reindeer. But then Labu was the only one, though everybody else were scared, they were trembling with fear when the apparition appeared. Labu was the only one who recognized that it was not a devil, but it was a beautiful princess who was captured by a magician. So Labu spoke about aloud some incantations and transformed the devil beast into a beautiful princess. He proposed the beautiful princess and the princess also smiled shyly. But at that precise moment, Kuldeep Singh and his friends started firing at the uh, apparition, and out of fear the monster just ran away. But in the magician who was hiding in the cave heard all this, and the magician came out and he tried to kill Labu, because according to the magician, if Labu gets a chance to rescue the princess, then he cannot hold the princess in chains anymore. So after, according to this story, though Labu went in search of the princess, he could not, because the magician had thrown a huge mountain at him, and as a result he finally jumped back home, and while jumping from Himalayas to his land, he had a leg sprain. So now the boy could guess the reason for the leg sprain, and Labu shocked him with the doubt of repeated story. When Labu was astonished because the boy fell prey for this story yet again, and in the end we have Labu's reaction saying, "Have I not told you this story before?" It is as if I had told this story, or maybe I am not sure if I have told this story, but he was very happy that the boy has fallen for his story once again. Now let us have a look at the multiple choice questions based on this session. Labu went on a trip to, the options available are America, South India, Himalayas or countryside. So Labu went on a trip to, the answer is answer C, Himalayas. Second question. Kuldeep Singh and his friends were dash, and what are the options here? Great hunters, brave fighters, well experienced, inexperienced. If you have listened to the story carefully, according to Labu, Kuldeep Singh and his friends were option D, inexperienced. According to Labu, in fact, though he pointed out innumerable prey or game, yet Kuldeep Singh and his friends were not able to hit even one animal for that matter. Just to give them some sort of pleasure, Labu says he hunted so many animals. According to this story, or according to the falsities of Labu, how many tigers did Labu shoot? 12 tigers, 15 tigers, 20 tigers or 1 tiger? Well, Labu is a known boaster, one who exaggerates a lot of things. So according to his story, he is a hero, and he hit 12 tigers. The answer is Labu shot 12 tigers. Now when he narrated the story of the devil who was transformed from a Nepali princess, the devil had dash, 2 heads, 4 hands, bear body, deer hand, goat body, lion head, or dog's head and a man's body. According to the description of Labu, the devil or the monster or the apparition had option B, a bear body and a deer head. The last question in this session. The narrator found that the story of Devil Princess is dash. Option A, false story, option B, new story, option C, real story, or option D, true story. This again is more like a anticlimax for the narrator here, because the narrator was angry with Labu priorly because he had narrated a false story about the devil ram. Keeping that in mind, he had stopped speaking to Labu, saying that all his stories were false. After a long gap, when Labu returned to the village, out of his previous affection which he had for Labu, he went in search of him and found him ill and limping. And out of curiosity, when he asked Labu, Labu narrated another story, at the end of which the narrator found out that the story of the devil princess is in fact option A, a false story. This shows that Labu is a born liar, and lying is something which he cannot change. But here we feel a bit of sympathy for the young boy, because though he knew Labu is lying, yet out of affection he came and spoke to Labu. Yet again he fell prey to the false story of Labu, and as a result the young narrator realizes that this story also is a false story. The sources and references used for this session: